Building visionOS apps presents us with new architecture and design problems, but luckily we can use our existing iOS development knowledge to conquer them. So I just opened Xcode 15 Beta 2, which you should install before watching this video because Beta 1 does not include the visionOS SDK, but it is now included in Beta 2. So we will be hitting the Create New Project button here, and in the tab bar here at the top, you will see that we now have a new operating system, visionOS. And for that operating system, we can either build an app, a framework, or a static library, and we will of course go with an app. So let's select that and hit next. In here you can give your app a name. So I will say, I will call mine Vision Course, and then team and identifier. You have to set that up yourself, but there are two new options here that we can select from when creating a visionOS project. And those are the initial scene type and whether it supports immersive space and which kind of immersive space. So for the initial scene, there are two options. We can either start with a window, which is the 2D variant, or with a volume, which is the 3D variant. We will start with a window because all of this can be changed and added and modified later on. So we will be adding 3D content, but for now, let's go with a window as a starting point. And then for the immersive space, you can set this to none, which is the default, meaning that your app does not support immersive space. It will only work in a shared space on the Vision Pro headset. Or you can select mixed, progressive, or full. We will leave this as none once again, because we want to set all of this stuff up programmatically later down the line of this course. So let's hit next and select a save location for this project. All right, let me maximize the window, and then we can give it a few seconds until the preview is available, because we do have a live preview for our visionOS apps. All right, so this is the example project that Xcode has when you create a visionOS app. And as always, you have your code on the left-hand side, and then you have your live preview on the right-hand side. Let me quickly go over everything that it got auto-generated, how it translates to UI, and how we can interact with the live preview. So first of all, we have a Vision Course app file, which is just our SwiftUI abstract. And since we selected the initial scene to be a window, we are presented with a window group here. This is where you would add volumes or immersive spaces later on. We then also have our content view, which is just the initial view of the app, just as in iOS, macOS, and all the other Apple platforms. But you will notice that we're not just importing SwiftUI, we're also importing RealityKit and RealityKit content. Now, RealityKit is something you might already know from my Code with Chris AR course, which is linked in the video description down below if you want to give that a watch. SwiftUI is obviously used for the UI, RealityKit is used for all of the 3D stuff, and then RealityKit content isn't actually a brand new framework, it's just a package that gets auto-generated here for you. And if we have a look at the sources in here, you will see that there is just a single file defining a content bundle, or a bundle really, and then also another USDA file containing a 3D object, which is the one that we're showing right here. So this little sphere over here. So this thing over here comes from the RealityKit content package. This is not needed in your production app. You can get rid of that when we actually play around with the visionOS SDK. So in here, quickly going over the code that got auto-generated. So you will notice that we have a single window here, which has two panels, a sidebar and a content panel, and this is just a navigation split view, as you might have already used it in iPadOS or macOS. So in the first closure of the navigation split view, you have your sidebar list, which in this case is scrollable and just has a text of items, so no buttons, no navigation links, nothing like that, just a text of item. And then on the right hand side, we have our content closure, or also called a detail closure. And in there we just have a VStack with a model 3D, which is a new view that can be used with SwiftUI and RealityKit. It displays a 3D object from RealityKit in a SwiftUI view. So in this case, our sphere from the RealityKit content package over here. So this thing right here is presented using the model 3D view. And then the rest of that is just the usual stuff with our nice new preview macro at the bottom of the file. So let me also quickly go over how the preview works and the different interactions you can do and the setup you have to go through. So first of all, you will notice that there are 5 different modes down here. So there's the interact mode, there's the free look mode, pan, orbit, and dolly. So with interact, we can actually interact with the scene as a user would on the actual Vision Pro glasses. So where our mouse is basically where the user is looking, and where we click is basically where the user would do the little tap gesture to select an item. So I can drag and move around to scroll this list over here, and I can hover over this little area at the bottom to get that hover effect, and then I can drag that around to move the window around in 3D space. And you will notice that visionOS automatically renders a little shadow right here on the ground below the window. So that's how we can move everything around. We can then go into the free look mode. And here, if we drag around, this would simulate head movement to the sides and also up and down of the real device. Next, let's have a look at the pan tool. So with the pan tool, we can actually move around, and you can see we're actually moving in a different room right here through the walls. Up, down, left, right. Then there's also the 4th tool, which is orbit, and that allows us to spin around our SwiftUI window in this case. So another type of rotation with another center anchor basically. So we already had the first type of rotation where we rotated our head. Here we are orbiting around the content. And then there's also the last tool, which is called dolly. And with that tool, we can zoom in and out or move forward and backward in the scene. All right, so those are all of the interactions that we have. And switching back to the default mode, let's center this window again. And then you will notice that there are 2 more buttons over here. So the first one is called simulated scene. And here we have 3 different scenes: kitchen, living room, and museum. And all of them have a day and a night mode. And we can, so right now kitchen is selected, but we could switch to living room by night, and then the scene will get reloaded. And looking around here, we're now in a 3D living room scene. And let's also try out museum by day. So you will notice that that also looks completely different, just a few different scenes, so you can test your apps in different environments. And then the last button is the camera, and here you can change some camera settings. I would just leave these camera settings as they are and perhaps go back into the living room by day. I think that is a very nice environment to prototype your apps with. All right, so that's it for this first introductory lesson. Next, we will have a look at some of the 2D UI components. And once you've done covering all of those, we will jump right into 3D apps with visionOS. So you've just created your first visionOS project, but what now? Let's start working on a to-do list app, the most classic tutorial project out there. In between lessons, I only did a few changes to this project just so it's easier for us to get started in this lesson. And basically what I did is completely clean out the content view. So it's only an empty view now instead of the placeholder stuff that was in there from the auto-generated Vision Pro project that we created in the last lesson. And then I also completely got rid of the Reality Kit content package, because in this section of the course, we will be building a to-do list app, which is simply a 2D Vision Pro app. We will not be using any 3D models in there, hence why I got rid of that package, just so the app builds faster and we are a bit cleaner here in our project overview. Nothing in there that we don't really need. So we just have this empty view in the content view, and let's have a look at how that actually behaves in the simulator, because we haven't even started the simulator once during this course yet. So let me grab it over here, and this is very similar to the live preview, but obviously it's a fully fledged simulator with sound and everything like that. Now I have noticed that in Xcode 15 beta 4, which is the version that I'm using right now, there's always a simulator device returned an error for the requested operation pop up here. So the app never actually launches on the simulator, which isn't a big issue because it is indeed installed here as the visionOS app in the main menu. And we can open that. And let's see if we can even zoom in a bit here. All right, just like that. So yeah, simulator looking good. Of course, the window is completely empty since all we have is our empty view in the content view. Now, as you might have seen in the demo project that got auto-generated, the basic approach is very similar to building iPadOS and macOS apps, and that's using a navigation split view instead of the navigation stack that you might be used to using from iOS applications. So in this lesson, we will be building out the navigation split view. I will giving you an overview of how it works and even a little trick in there that you might have already run across. Well, there's an issue with navigation split view that you might have already came across, and I'll show you a trick on how to fix that. So it's definitely worth it to watch this video until the end, even if you're not into building visionOS. If you just care about the navigation split view, it's already worth it. But before we get started with that, let me create a brand new Swift file, and I will call this models. And in here, we will define our to-do list and our to-do item models. So I would actually prefer to be using SwiftData for this course, but unfortunately, even though we are already in beta version 4 of Xcode 15, SwiftData is still not supported on visionOS. There is, well, it should be supported, but there are still bugs going on with it. We will be converting this project to SwiftData once those bugs are fixed and once SwiftData actually works on visionOS just as it does on all the other Apple platforms. But for now, we will just be creating a struct to-do list. We will be giving it an ID, which is a UUID. And since we're not persisting this anywhere, we can just assign it as a constant. And we're actually using that ID to be able to make the list identifiable, so we can use it in a SwiftUI list. And then let's also give this list a title that's just a string. And then let's also give it items, which is an array of to-do item. So let's define that next. So a struct to-do item that should also be identifiable. That should also get an ID property just like this. And I also want these to-do items to have a title. And I also want them to have a is done Boolean flag. And let me fix that typo real quick. All right, so that should be the basic setup for our data structure. Now, of course, we can either make the title constant or we can make it a variable. And actually, we want to have the items array be a variable so we can append and remove items from the to-do list if needed. So getting back to the content view, we can now start working on the navigation split view implementation. So let's get rid of the empty view here and let's create a navigation split view. Now, as you can see, there are tons of different initializers available here. We will just be working with the simplest one for now, and we might explore other ones in a dedicated navigation split view video in the future. But for this lesson, we will be using the initializer with a sidebar and a detail. And both of these are just view builder closures. So the sidebar is basically the sidebar here in Xcode, and the detail page is basically the detail page here in Xcode. So for our sidebar, we want a list over to-do lists. So we might as well create a state variable called to-do lists, which is an array of to-do list. And in the beginning, it should just be empty. And now we can create a SwiftUI list over all of those to-do lists. So here we can say list in. And this is where it gets interesting. So I have found that the easiest way to work with navigation split view is to now add a button in here. And as a title, I will say list.title. And in the action, I want to assign this list to be our selected list. So let's create a new state property here. And I will call this selected to-do list, which is an optional to-do list because in the beginning, no to-do list is selected. So let's make this nil by default. And then in our button, we can say selected to-do list. is the list of our current iteration of our current button right here. Let's quickly run that in the simulator and have a look at what happened so far. And I'm not expecting a lot because we don't have any to-do lists right now. So having a look at the simulator, it seems like something is loading in there. And there we have it. The app has now finished loading, and you can already see a hint of our navigation split view with the sidebar on the left-hand side and the detail pane on the trailing side right here, which obviously consumes most of the available space. And the sidebar is just about, I would say, a quarter of the available space. So now let's fill all of this with some content. So first of all, I want to give the list a navigation title of to-do lists. Let's have a look at how that behaves on visionOS, because all of these things are new. So you can see we have a navigation title here in the sidebar, and later on we can then also assign a navigation title to our detail panel here on the right hand side. So that would be displayed right here, but that's not something that we're setting up right now. Instead, let's add a toolbar button to our list so we can easily add some dummy to-do lists. For now, we will create a form in the next lesson where the user can actually create real to-do lists. I just want to add this dummy button right now so we can actually test our UI implementation. So I will add the toolbar modifier, and in here, I will not be creating a toolbar item. I will just be adding a button, and I will say add. And in here, we can say let list be a to-do list with a title of list and then the number of to-do lists that we already have. So the first one that we create will be called list 0, the second one will be called list 1, and so on. And I will leave the items array empty for now. And then let's append this to our state variable, just like that. And that should basically create a new to-do list and show that in our sidebar. So let's have a look at that in the Vision Pro simulator. And there you have it. We have the add button in the toolbar now. And when I click it, all right, so there might be an issue. Yeah, it should not be to-do list. It should be to-do lists.count in here. So let's run that again. And let me zoom in again, just like that. Now, if we press the add button, we will have list 0, list 1, list 2, and so on. And as you can see, we get the hover effect for free since this is a SwiftUI list. But obviously nothing happens when we click on it since we're not showing anything in the detail closure over here. So let's do that next. So we only want to show something in the detail closure if we actually have a to-do list selected right now. So we can say if let selected to-do list. And this is a new shorthand syntax here to unwrap the optional. So if we option click that, you will notice that it used to be optional, but now it is a constant that is not optional anymore. So now in here, we could, for example, start to build out this view, but that is also part of a future lesson. So for today, just to get it all started, we will just display the title of the selected to-do list. And then let's also add a navigation title. Let's call it details for, and then let's also add the to-do list title in there. All right, so having a look at this in the simulator now, we can select our different lists in the sidebar and they will be displayed correctly in the detail panel. If you run into issues where this selected to-do list is not being updated, you can make sure that your list is identifiable. And if you're still running into that issue, you can just attach an ID modifier to your detail view, basically saying selected to-do list.id. Let's run that real quick again, but since we're not running into this SwiftUI bug right now, we didn't actually need to do that. But now the switching will definitely work for you, even if you ran into the issue where the detail view didn't refresh when changing your selection in here. All right, so that's already it for this second lesson of the visionOS course. In the next lessons, we will add a form to create actual to-do lists with an actual title. Then we will be creating a detail view here to have a look at all the tasks in the to-do list, enable users to add and complete these tasks as well. So be on the lookout for that. Subscribe to the channel if you don't want to miss future visionOS lessons. In the last lesson, we started building this to-do list application for our visionOS course. We created a navigation split view and added a button in the toolbar of our sidebar here to create new dummy to-do lists. And then we also enabled a selection of the to-do lists so their details can be displayed in the detail panel on the right-hand side here. Today we will replace this dummy button and start implementing some UI for this detail view as well. So let's get right into it. So currently we have this add button here in the toolbar, and it just creates a new to-do list with a placeholder name, increasing that name as we add more lists. So the first one will be called list 0, then list 1, and so on, and then appends that list to our to-do lists array, which is just a state variable up here, not persisted, because as I mentioned in the previous lesson, SwiftData currently does not work on visionOS. So once it does work, we will refactor this to use SwiftData instead. So let's introduce two new state variables here, and the first one will be show add list alert, and this will just be a Boolean flag, of course set to false, and then another state variable saying new list title. That will be a string and it will be empty by default. We will use these in a second. So before we use them, let's copy these two lines of code here. Make sure you copy them because we will need them again later on. And in the add button, let's instead just say show add list alert dot toggle. What will this do? So after our toolbar, still in our sidebar, basically after our list here, we'll attach the alert modifier, and we will use this one right here with a title key of add to-do list. Is presented is a binding to our show add list alert. So basically we're saying whenever the button is tapped, we want this alert to show. And in the alert, we will add three things. We will add a text field to enter the title for the new list. Then we will add a cancel button and a create button. So let's first of all add the text field here, and I will say to-do list title is the placeholder and the text is new list title. So that's the state variable that we just created up here. Then we will add a cancel button. So we will use this one right here. So I will say cancel, role will be cancel, and action will just be an empty closure. We don't want anything to happen here. The alert will dismiss automatically as far as I know. And then we will add a third button and I will just call it create. And in here we will paste what we just copied from our add button that we already had. So we will create a new to-do list, but of course we will use the new list title, and the to-do items array will be empty because when you create a new to-do list, of course, you don't have any to-dos in there yet. We will fill that out in a bit. And then, of course, we will append it to our state variable. So with all of this in place, let's have a look at how this works in the Vision Pro simulator now. So let me zoom in a bit for you. Just a bit, all right. And switching back to the pointer tool, we can now click the add button as we did before, and then an alert will come up saying add to-do list. This right here would be our app icon if we had one, but that is currently not set in our asset catalog. So this is just a placeholder app icon showing there. Then we can enter a list title, and you will notice that a keyboard will come up on the Vision Pro device, but since this is the simulator, we can always just use our hardware keyboard on our Mac. So I will say this is our dummy to-do list. And then we have the create button with our primary color and the cancel button, which is grayed out a bit since it is a button with the .cancel role. SwiftUI automatically infers that we want this to not be highlighted. This should be the secondary option only, so it's grayed out a bit. So let's hit create, then zoom out a tiny bit again. And then you will notice that we have our dummy to-do list in the sidebar now. We can select it and then it will be displayed here in our detail view. So that's really nice so far. All right, so next we probably care about the detail view, and for that I will create a new SwiftUI view and I will call this to-do list view. So basically we can just copy over everything that we had in the detail closure beforehand, and let me actually re-indent this. And we can also get rid of the preview. Now you can use the preview if you want to. From my testing, it does slow down Xcode quite significantly, especially while I'm recording the screen. Hence why I'm using the simulator instead of the preview. But for your own development, of course, feel free to use the preview. And then in here, I will say, let list be a to-do list. And then we can replace these occurrences of selected to-do list with just list. All right. And then in our content view, we can now use the to-do list view, passing in the selected to-do list. Let's have a very quick look at the simulator to see that nothing changed. So create a dummy list, hit create, select it, and everything is still exactly the same. So let me actually make the simulator a bit bigger so it's easier to see in the video recording as well. Just like that. All right, so as you can see, we still have our navigation title, which is currently partially hidden by this system UI button up here, which for some reason is not working for me right now, but it should bring up the control center as far as I understand. But the navigation title is still there, and the detailed text is also still there. So basically nothing changed. So now we can start working in the to-do list view. And first of all, we probably want to get rid of this text and replace it with a list of our to-do list.items. And here we can say item in, and we can re-indent everything like that. All right, and then for each of the items, I will just have a list row, which is the item.title. So very simple stuff right there. We also want to create another alert here, which the user can use to insert items or to-do items into this to-do list. So let's create another toolbar modifier here. And in there, let's create another button and say add item, or let's call it add to-do. I think that's a nicer way to call it. So let's create another state variable, say show add to-do alert. Will be another bool, will be set to false again, and we will just toggle that in our button here. And then below our toolbar, we will once again add an alert, the exact same setup as before. So here we can say add to-do. Let me double check. Yeah, so we called it add to-do list. So I also want to make sure this one is called add to-do. So instead of create, for example, or new, I want to have the same nomenclature in here. Is presented is once again a binding to our show add to-do alert. And the actions, let me refactor that to be a trailing closure. Just like that. In here, we can basically also copy everything from before. So just like that. So we have to create a new state variable for the to-do title. So let's say new to-do title. And that's once again a string, which is empty by default. And then we can use that here as our binding, just like that. And let's leave this action empty for now. So let's run this in your simulator and have a look at it. I'm not in interaction mode. So that's something that you will probably also run into. I was in magnifying mode instead of interaction mode. So let's switch to interaction mode. Let's just call this list dummy, hit create. And I really want to zoom in a bit, but it's a bit hard to handle the simulator right now. Okay, so let's, oh, there's a typo, but doesn't matter since we're not persisting it anyway. So we have the details, we have the add to do button in here. And now we have our alert enabling us to enter a to-do list title. It actually says in there, so we will have to fix that and say to-do title. And this cancel button also work. We didn't test that in our first alert, but it does work in the second one and in the first one as well, of course. So let's fix this text field placeholder here to just remove the list, just say to do title. Then we have the cancel button and the create button. So we can say let to do equals a new to do item with the title of our new to do title, and is done should be set to false. And then of course we can't append to the list.items array because our list is a constant. So we can change that to a var, and it would be even better to change it to a state var. Now let's see if that still compiles, and it looks good. So let's have it run on the simulator again. And for some reason it zooms, it moves around quite a bit. Okay, so now I was able to move it a bit closer to the user. So now let's create our list again. I will just call it list, create. Let's select that. And for some reason it is very, very transparent right now. So that looks a bit better. Zoom in again. We can add a to-do, and let's make sure we focus the text field to do number 1. And it's using the US keyboard here instead of my German keyboard. So let's see where I can find the pound sign. There it is. So to do 1, let's hit create. And there we have it. We have our first list row in here for our to-do list item to do number 1. So to recap, in this lesson you learned how to wire up these toolbar buttons to present alerts, and you learned about the cancel button role and how you can add a text field to an alert. You also learned that alerts on visionOS, just as on macOS as well, by default show the app icon up here. We also added the second button here to show an alert, and then we also started to manage the state using our state var for the list, and of course for our other variables to show the alert and for the new to-do title. We also created a super simple list with just a text as the list row. In the next lesson, we will refactor this list row so you're able to toggle whether this to-do is done or not. And if you don't want to miss the next lessons, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in a comment down below what you want to see next for the visionOS course once we have finished and wrapped up this to-do list app. Welcome to the next lesson of our visionOS course, and in this section of the course we are still building our to-do list app, which is just a simple 2D SwiftUI app that you might have already built for iOS or macOS. We're just building one for visionOS to get familiar with how the UI components work and how they behave on this new platform. In the future sections, we will then build some more native visionOS apps with multiple windows, with ornaments, and so on. We will explore all of that stuff. But for now, let's continue working on the to-do list app. And this is where we left off in the last lesson. So we created our to-do list view, which is basically the detail view. So we have a navigation split view. And let me actually start the simulator in the background so we can have a look at all of that in a second. So in our navigation split view, we have a list of our to-do lists. We have a button through which a user can select one to-do list, and those selected to-do lists are then shown in our detail panel on the right hand side. Right now that's just a list over all of the to-do items in that to-do list and just showing the title of the item. I believe we can now switch to the simulator and have a look on there. So as always, I'll have to zoom in a bit. So we have our to-do lists application running here. We have a button showing an alert to create a new list. Let's hit create there. Then we can select that list and we can see the details over here, and we can create a first to-do item in there, hit create, and that will be shown in our list in the detail panel over here. So today we want to enable the user to toggle whether this to-do is done or not. And we also want to improve this detail view here a bit to make it look a bit nicer. So for that, we will get started by changing up how this list works here. So we will get rid of we will embed the text in an H stack. So basically I want to create the same layout that the reminders app has. So we want to have a circle on the leading side, then the title of the to-do, and then a spacer at the end. So we already have the title in here. So let's add the spacer at the end. How do we want to have that toggle circle thingy in there? So there would be two approaches. You can either use a toggle, but the toggle doesn't really have the right UI for us in this sense. So it's literally a toggle or a button on visionOS. Both of them are not really what we're looking for. So instead we will just create our own button, and as the label we will use SF symbols, and we will change the symbol depending on whether the to-do is done or not. So we will say if the item is done, then we will use the circle.fill SF symbol, and if it's not done, then we will just use the circle SF symbol. This way we automatically adopt the accent color of the user, of like the device accent color, and it will be used to fill the circle. So that should be really nice. So let's have a quick look at that in the simulator. We obviously haven't written any button logic yet, but we can zoom in a bit again. And let me just create a random to-do list in here and a random to-do item in here. And there we have it. We already have the very basic UI. So anywhere in this cell, it is tappable. So we have a hitbox of the entire row. And then we have our circle, which is not filled right now because this to-do is not done yet. But this is basically exactly what I had in mind for this, and how you probably already know it from the reminders app. So toggling the is done flag is not that straightforward here, since we are using @state. We might also explore using the observation framework on visionOS, but for now we're staying with the traditional state variables here. Because of that, we cannot just say item.isDone.toggle, because this item here is a let constant in our list. So cannot use mutating member on immutable value. Item is a let constant. We cannot do this. So instead we will have to grab this item from our initial list.items array and in there toggle the value. So what do I mean by that? By that I mean that in the end we want to say list.items at our item index, and we will get that in a second, .isDone.toggle. So this is the call that we want to make in the end. So how do we know this item index here? We could go over the indices in the list, or use, for example, the zip function, which combines an item's index with the item in a tuple. But both of them are not that nice for view rebuilds and view updates. So I actually dislike using zip and .indices in a list. Instead, I will just grab the index out of the list right here. So I will say let item index is list.items.firstIndex, where $0.id is the same as our item.id. This will be optional, but I will do the cardinal sin and force unwrap this, because this code can only be called if the item actually exists, because it's within this view builder closure of the list. So I cannot imagine any scenario where this would fail to force unwrap and crash your app. Now, you could of course be safe and embed this in a optional unwrap here through an if-let syntax. So now this item index is indeed non-optional. This would also work just fine. Just wanted to show you that I believe this is a place where force unwrapping should be safe, but the keyword is should, because with force unwrapping, you never know how it goes in production. So I haven't quite figured out how I can move something towards myself in the visionOS simulator, so bear with me as I always have to zoom in again. So let me create a list. And in there, let me create a to-do. And now we can tap that to-do, and you will notice that it does switch to the circle.fill as of symbol, which means that the is done flag is actually set to true, because that's what we're checking here in order to determine which as of symbol to use. And of course, undoing it also works. Now, if you would imagine we have a list of to-dos, so I'll just create a bunch of them in here, and then I toggle one in the middle, just like this. This is not the best user experience, as users probably expect all of their done to-dos to be at the bottom of the list and all of their not done to-dos to be at the top. We will actually go one step further, and we will refactor this to use 2 sections. So let's change this list here to a for each and embed that for each in a section of, let's call this one to do, and then embed that section once again in a new list. So now we basically have the same items as before, but they're now all in a section called to do. Of course, we don't want to show all items here. We only want to show the items for which $0.isDone is false. So we only want to show the items that are not done yet. And then we can basically copy paste this entire section, paste it down here, and instead of to do, this one will be called done, and we can get rid of this comparison here. So now if we run that again in the simulator, first of all, I will have to zoom in as always. Oh, very annoying that simulator doesn't persist that. So let's create our list. Select that. And you will notice that we already have our section for to do and our section for done. So we can add a to do one. Let's create that. Add a to do two. Let's create that. We can toggle the to do two, and it will be moved to the done section. But as you notice, that was a very harsh transition, no real animation going on in there. So let's also change that. So anytime this is done, toggle is performed, I want to wrap that in a with animation closure. So let's also do that up here with animation. And if we run that again, then we will have a nice animation. And we are slowly zooming further into the scene here. So let me move out a bit and try to grab the window so it gets a bit bigger again. All right, that should be good. Let me move it up a bit. No, it's small again. So annoying to work with the simulator. So let's create our list. And let's add a to do one, create, and let's add a to do two, hit create. And now if we toggle the to do two, you will notice that it smoothly animates from one list section to another. And of course the as of symbol fills. And there is also some auditory feedback. So there is a small click or a very low noise click sound in there. You probably don't hear that in the recording, but you can try this out for yourself. Now you might have noticed that every single time we open the app, we have to create a new list and new to-dos. This is super annoying. We're not using persistence right now as SwiftData doesn't work on visionOS yet, but of course we will update this app to use SwiftData once that is supported through the Xcode 15 beta, hopefully in the next version. Right now I'm using version 4. Hopefully it will be supported in version 5. In the meantime, you can check out my free complete SwiftData course, completely free, about 1 hour of content about SwiftData for iOS. But once it is supported on visionOS, it should be the exact same setup. When you're playing around with this app, you could also make sure to always initialize your variables with a few different to-do lists, with a few to-dos, so some preview data in there. You could also do that and save some time debugging and trying out everything. In the last lessons, we did work with Xcode 15 beta version 4. 4, but in the meantime, since I recorded and uploaded them, Xcode 15 beta version 5 actually got released, which fixes all of the SwiftData related issues that I had when trying to add SwiftData to this visionOS project. So in today's lesson number 5, we will be refactoring the app to use SwiftData for persistence. And for that, I have created an example here. So I have a to-do list called groceries. And in that to-do list, I have one to-do called salad, which is currently moved to the done section. So let me rerun this project actually. And then you will notice that groceries is still there if I'm able to select it, right? And salad is also still in the done column, and of course we can toggle it. So the app is exactly the same, but we have persistence now. I implemented this in about 5 minutes. So let's see how long it will take us today while I also explain what we're doing in this lesson. So let me quickly revert all of these changes so we can implement it ourselves in this lesson. Alright, so I just switched back to the main branch of this repository, enabling me to re-implement everything that we need for SwiftData support. And for that, I want to start by resetting up our models. So of course, we will have to import SwiftData. Let me also zoom in a bit to Xcode here so it's easier to see. In the project so far, we used structs to define the to-do list and the to-do item, but in SwiftData, we can instead use an add model class. So this exact setup here, and let me copy that and paste it for the bottom struct as well. Now, SwiftData models are identifiable by themselves, so we can get rid of that protocol conformance for both of these. And we can also get rid of the ID property because that is automatically synthesized when you're using the add model Swift macro. Let's also change the title to be a var. And let's change this items property to have the relationship annotation and make sure that it is cascading. Cascading means that when we're, for example, deleting a to-do list, all of the items that a to-do list has a relationship with will also get deleted. This is what cascading means, and that's why it is relevant to use that attribute in most cases, of course. And then as you can see in the error message here, add model requires an initializer be provided for a to-do list that is from the macro model. So we will create an initializer. Luckily, Xcode 15 basically does all of that for ourselves, but I want this item array to be empty by default, and that way we can get rid of it in the initializer and we can just initialize our to-do list with its title. So let's do the same stuff for our to-do item. We can get rid of the ID once again because that is automatically created. We can make the title a variable, and we can make the isDone false by default. And then let's also create an initializer, getting rid of the isDone flag again, because that is set to false by default. We don't need to explicitly initialize it. And with that, in just a few minutes, we have rewritten our structs into model classes for SwiftData. So with that out of the way, we can now tell our app to use the model container for these models and store them in SwiftData. So in our main abstract, let's import SwiftData. And on our window group, let's add the model container for our to-do list.self. As I've mentioned in a few other SwiftData lessons, you could turn this into an array and also explicitly specify to-do item.self. But since to-do list has a relationship with item, it is not needed to specify both of them. So let me revert that again. I think this is cleaner. But of course, you're open to use whatever implementation you want. Let's also make sure we copy this model container view modifier here and use it in our preview in case you want to actually use the preview in your project. As I mentioned before, I'm not going to use it in this course, just because it does slow down Xcode quite a bit while I'm recording my screen as well. Alright, so let's move on to our content view, and in here let's import SwiftData, same thing as always. And when we're working with SwiftData, I have added an Xcode shortcut here where you can watch a video on that as well. That just enables me to quickly access the model context from the environment, because we will need that to create new to-do lists and then also create new to-do items in our to-do list view. Alright, so most of our setup stays the same, so we will still have our to-do lists array, but we don't need a default value for that. And instead of add state, we will use add query. This makes sure that it is saved and persisted through SwiftData. All of the other variables can stay the same, and I always like to have a line break between my environment variables and my other variables. Most of our setup stays the same, but of course the initializer for to-do list changed, so we don't need to explicitly specify an empty items array here. And instead of using to-do lists.append, our new list, instead we will use our model context.insert method and insert this list into the model context. Once again, the model context is available to us through the add environment property wrapper here, which we can use because we have specified a model container, which internally has the model context, or model container.main context, I believe is what we're using in SwiftUI by default. Because of this view modifier here, we can use it in the preview. Because of this scene modifier here, we can use it in the actual running app. So with that setup, the content view is already done, but we still have to do a few changes to our to-do list view. So once again, we will import SwiftData, and then let's also use the model context, or grab the model context from the environment, because we will need it again when we're creating our to-do items down here, but we will do that last. You might remember our little dance here with the item index in our button, the buttons that toggle whether a to-do is currently done or not. We don't have to do that dance anymore because we're now using classes instead of structs. So this is a reference basically now and not a value. A topic for another lesson, but if you know what that means, then you now understand why we needed that dance beforehand. Now we don't need it anymore, so now we can just say item.isDone.toggle. So this is a lot cleaner now using this button. And then let's just copy that and replace the little dance in our second section here as well. It would be a nice homework for you to collapse these two sections perhaps into one reusable view, so factor it out and then just use that view once in here instead of the HStack and once in here instead of the HStack. Nothing that we will cover in this lesson, but might be a nice homework for you to try that out yourself. Alright, and then the last thing that we will need to update is how we create and insert new to-dos. So the initializer once again is changed because we don't need the isDone flag anymore. As you remember, we set that to false by default and removed it from the initializer of our to-do item. So we can get rid of that. And then before we append the to-do into our list.items relationship setup, we first need to insert it into the context. So we will say model context.insert our to-do. For some reason, there's no autocomplete for model context.insert, but we did grab it from the environment, so we should be good to go. And with that, let's run it in the simulator and see if anything changed, or if I still have the exact same setup as before. And it looks like nothing changed for me. Everything is still persisted. But just to try it out, let's add a new to-do list, and I will call this video ideas. Let's create that. And in the video ideas, let's add another to-do. Let's say, for example, plan the next visionOS lesson. So let's hit create. We got that in there, and I haven't done that yet, so I'm not going to toggle it. For some reason, the sidebar is frozen for me and it doesn't show the hover effect. I'm guessing that that is also a beta issue in the Xcode 15 beta. So if I run the app again, then you will probably notice, and we still have the zooming in and out issue in the visionOS simulator. So let me grab that, make it a bit bigger and zoom in again. Just like that. So now you will notice that I can select groceries, but I can't select the next one. This is most likely a visionOS beta issue. So once that is fixed, I will let you know in the pinned comment below the video. But for now, you have now learned how to add SwiftData to your visionOS project. It's actually super simple. Make sure your models are at model classes. You define your relationships properly, and you create custom initializers. Then make sure that you create the model container for your window group and for all of your previews. And then just adopt your code a little bit to use the model context and the add query property wrapper instead of the add state property wrapper.